Benjamin Miller's hands trembled as he stood frozen in the doorway of the nursery. The soft glow of the night light cast shadows across the room, and there, in the rocking chair by the window, sat Tasha Bryant. His 3-month-old son, Ethan, was nestled against her chest, nursing peacefully. The baby's tiny hand rested against her dark skin, his eyes closed in complete contentment. For a moment time stopped. Benjamin's mind couldn't process what he was seeing. His heart hammered against his ribs, confusion and shock flooding through him like ice water. He'd come upstairs at 2 in the morning after hearing the baby monitor go silent, expecting to find Rebecca, the overnight nurse he'd hired. Instead, he found his daytime nanny doing something that made his stomach turn with a feeling he couldn't quite name. "What are you doing?" The words came out harsh, cutting through the peaceful quiet of the room. Tasha's head snapped up, her brown eyes wide with surprise and then immediate fear. She moved to cover herself with a blanket while keeping Ethan secure. "Mr. Miller, I can explain." "Explain?" Benjamin's voice rose despite his effort to stay calm. "You're breastfeeding my son. Where is Rebecca?" Tasha stood carefully, adjusting the blanket and holding Ethan close. The baby made a small sound of protest at being disturbed. "She left. Around 11 o'clock. She got a phone call and just walked out. She said it was an emergency with her mother, but she didn't ask permission, she just left. Ethan has been screaming for 3 hours, Mr. Miller." 3 hours. "I tried everything." Benjamin stepped into the room, his mind racing. "You tried everything? There's formula. There are bottles prepared in the refrigerator." He couldn't keep it down. Tasha's voice cracked slightly. The formula made him sick. He threw up twice and he was screaming so hard he could barely breathe. "I walked with him, I sang to him, I tried a warm bath, I tried the swing, I tried everything you can possibly imagine. He was getting weaker, Mr. Miller." His lips were starting to turn pale. "So your solution was to nurse him yourself?" Benjamin felt anger building in his chest, hot and righteous. "Do you have any idea how inappropriate this is? How wrong?" Tasha's eyes filled with tears, but she held his gaze. "I know how it looks. I know. But he was in distress. Real distress. I was about to call 911 when he finally latched on and calmed down. I only did it because I was terrified something terrible would happen to him." "You had no right." Benjamin moved forward and reached for his son. "Give him to me." Tasha carefully transferred Ethan to his father's arms. The moment the baby left her embrace, he began to whimper, then cry. Within seconds, the cries escalated into full-blown screams. Ethan's face turned red, his little body going rigid with distress. "See," Tasha said desperately. "He's hungry. He needs to eat. He'll eat from a bottle like he's supposed to." Benjamin's jaw clenched as he tried to soothe his son, but Ethan only screamed louder. "The formula makes him sick. Please, just let me finish feeding him and then we can talk about this." "No." Benjamin's voice was firm. "I want you to pack your things and leave. Tonight." Tasha's face went pale. "Mr. Miller, please. I was only trying to help. I would never do anything to hurt Ethan. I love him." "That's exactly the problem." Benjamin turned away from her, bouncing Ethan gently even as the baby's screams intensified. "You've crossed a line that can't be uncrossed. I need you out of this house within the hour." "But where will I go? It's 2 in the morning. That's not my concern. You should have thought about that before you made this choice." Benjamin's words were cold, but inside, a war raged. Part of him recognized the desperation in her voice, the genuine care in her eyes. But the other part, the part that had been raised in a world of strict boundaries and proper behavior, couldn't get past the image he'd walked in on. Tasha stood there for a moment, tears streaming down her face. She looked at Ethan, still screaming in his father's arms, and her expression broke Benjamin's heart even as his anger held firm. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I truly am. I was only trying to save him." She walked past Benjamin and out of the nursery. He heard her footsteps on the stairs, heard the sound of her moving around in the small room off the kitchen where she'd been staying. Ethan continued to scream, his cries echoing through the large house. Benjamin carried his son downstairs to the kitchen, trying to prepare a bottle with one hand while holding the thrashing baby with the other. Ethan's face was soaked with tears, his little voice growing hoarse from crying. When Benjamin finally managed to get the bottle ready and offered it to his son, Ethan took a few desperate sucks before gagging and spitting up. "Come on, buddy," Benjamin murmured, trying again. "Please eat. Please." But Ethan turned his face away, crying harder, his small body shaking with the force of his distress. 15 minutes later, Tasha appeared in the kitchen doorway with a small suitcase. She changed into jeans and a green sweater, her eyes red and swollen. She looked at Ethan, still screaming in Benjamin's arms, and fresh tears fell down her cheeks. "Mr. Miller, I'm begging you. Let me help him one more time. Please. After that, I'll go and I'll never come back. I promise. Just please don't let him suffer like this." Benjamin looked down at his son. Ethan's cries had taken on a desperate, painful quality. His lips did look pale and he felt hot to the touch. For a moment, Benjamin's resolve wavered. Then he thought about what people would say. What his late wife's family would think. What society would judge. "No," he said quietly. "Goodbye, Tasha." Tasha nodded slowly, understanding that no amount of pleading would change his mind. She walked to the door, glancing back one last time at the baby she'd cared for since he was 2 weeks old. "I hope he'll be okay," she said softly. Then she was gone, the door clicking shut behind her. Benjamin stood alone in his kitchen, holding his screaming son, and for the first time since his wife died, he felt completely lost. The next 3 hours were torture. Ethan refused every bottle, every attempt at comfort. Benjamin called the pediatrician's emergency line at 4 in the morning. The on-call doctor listened to the symptoms and said it sounded like the baby was just being fussy, that he would eat when he was hungry enough to keep trying with the formula. But as dawn broke over the Miller estate, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Ethan's cries had weakened to exhausted whimpers. His eyes looked glassy and unfocused. Benjamin held his son against his chest, feeling the rapid beat of the baby's heart, and a cold fear settled into his bones. He'd made a choice based on propriety and pride. Now, listening to his son's labored breathing, he wondered if it had been the right one. Have you ever had to choose between what's proper and what's right? What would you have done in Benjamin's place? Drop a comment below and let us know. And if you're loving this story so far, hit that subscribe button because you won't want to miss what happens next. 6 weeks earlier, Tasha Bryan had been a different person. She'd been a mother for one brief, beautiful week. She'd held her daughter, Zoe, against her chest and breathed in that perfect baby smell. She'd counted tiny fingers and toes. She'd nursed her and sang to her and made promises about the future they would share. Then on the 7th day, Zoe stopped breathing. The doctors said it was a congenital heart defect, something no one had detected during pregnancy. They said there was nothing anyone could have done. They said these things happen sometimes, tragic and random and senseless. They said she would heal in time. But Tasha didn't feel like healing. She felt like dying. Her apartment in the modest Brooklyn neighborhood seemed enormous without Zoe in it. The crib she'd assembled so carefully sat empty in the corner of her bedroom. The tiny clothes, washed and folded and never worn, filled a drawer she couldn't bring herself to open. And her body, still thinking it had a baby to feed, ached with milk that no one needed. Tasha's mother had come for a week after the funeral. She'd made soup and tea and sat with Tasha through the worst of the crying. But her mother had her own life, her own job at the hospital, and eventually she had to go back to her own place. "You need to keep living, baby," her mother had said, hugging her tight. "Zoe would want you to keep living." But what did living even mean anymore? The bills didn't care about grief. The rent came due whether Tasha could get out of bed or not. Her job at the daycare center had given her 3 weeks of bereavement leave, but she'd known she couldn't go back there. She couldn't spend her days surrounded by healthy babies, watching other mothers pick up their children, seeing what she'd lost reflected in every small face. So she'd looked for something else. Anything else. And that's when she'd found the listing for a live-in nanny position. The pay was generous, enough to keep her apartment and put some money aside. The family needed someone immediately because the mother had passed away during childbirth and the father was overwhelmed. Tasha had almost skipped past the listing. How could she take care of someone else's baby when she'd lost her own? But something made her pause. Maybe it was the desperation in the ad. Maybe it was the fact that this baby had also lost his mother. Maybe it was just that she needed a reason to keep breathing, and caring for a child, even someone else's child, felt like the only thing that might make sense anymore. She'd interviewed with Benjamin Miller on a Tuesday afternoon. His house was the kind of place she'd only seen in magazines, a modern estate in Westchester County with floor-to-ceiling windows and perfectly manicured gardens. Benjamin himself was tall and handsome in that way wealthy people often are, with kind blue eyes that looked as tired and lost as she felt. "I appreciate you coming," he'd said, shaking her hand in his study. "I've interviewed 7 nannies in the past week and none of them felt right. My mother has been helping, but she has her own health issues and can't be here full-time." "I understand," Tasha had replied, sitting in the leather chair across from his desk. "I saw in the listing that your wife passed away. I'm very sorry." Benjamin's jaw had tightened. "Thank you. It's been difficult." Ethan is 8 weeks old and I'm trying to be there for him, but I have a company to run. I need someone who can love him the way his mother would have. Someone who will treat him like he's precious. Tasha had felt tears prick her eyes then. I lost my daughter 3 weeks ago, she'd said quietly. She was 7 days old. The doctor said it was her heart. Benjamin's expression had softened immediately. I'm so sorry. I can't imagine. I wasn't going to mention it in the interview, Tasha had continued, wiping her eyes. I thought it might make me seem too fragile, too unreliable. But I need you to know that I understand what loss feels like. And I promise you that if you trust me with your son, I will protect him with everything I have. I will love him like he deserves to be loved. Benjamin had been quiet for a moment, studying her. Then he'd nodded. When can you start? That had been 5 weeks ago. Tasha had moved into the small room off the kitchen, a cozy space with a comfortable bed and a window that looked out over the garden. She'd met Ethan, a tiny, serious baby with his mother's dark hair and his father's blue eyes. And despite the pain in her heart, despite the grief that still woke her up crying in the middle of the night, she'd fallen completely in love with him. Caring for Ethan gave her day structure. She woke at 6 to prepare his bottles. She changed his diapers and gave him baths. She held him when he cried and sang him the same songs she'd sung to Zoe. Benjamin worked long hours at his investment firm in Manhattan, often not coming home until late evening. Tasha became Ethan's whole world during those daylight hours. At night, Rebecca, the overnight nurse, would arrive at 7. She was older, experienced, and efficient. She would take over, and Tasha would retreat to her room, where she would pump the milk her body still produced and pour it down the sink, crying at the waste of it, at the cruelty of a body that didn't know her baby was gone. The other staff members at the estate kept mostly to themselves. There was James, the groundskeeper, and his wife Patricia, who came twice a week to clean. There was Gerald, Benjamin's driver, and occasionally Benjamin's mother would visit, a sharp-eyed woman named Virginia who seemed to disapprove of everything and everyone. But Tasha didn't mind the isolation. She had Ethan. She had purpose. She had a reason to keep breathing. Until the night Rebecca disappeared and everything fell apart. Now, sitting in a cab at 5 in the morning heading back to her empty apartment, Tasha felt that familiar weight of grief settling over her shoulders again. She'd been fired. She'd lost Ethan the same way she'd lost Zoe. Different circumstances but the same hollow ache in her chest. The cab pulled up to her building as the sun started to rise. Tasha paid the driver and climbed the 3 flights of stairs to her apartment. The key stuck in the lock like it always did and she had to jiggle it twice before the door opened. Inside, everything was exactly as she'd left it. The dishes in the sink. The mail piled on the small table by the door. The crib in the corner of her bedroom, still waiting for a baby who would never sleep in it. Tasha set her suitcase down and walked to the window. Outside the city was waking up. People heading to work, to school, to lives that made sense. She thought about Ethan, about the way he'd looked at her with those trusting blue eyes. She thought about Benjamin's angry face, his cold dismissal. She'd done the wrong thing for the right reasons. Or maybe the right thing for the wrong reasons. She didn't know anymore. All she knew was that she was alone again, and the weight of that loneliness felt like it might crush her. The night had started normally. Rebecca had arrived at 7 o'clock sharp as she always did. She was a woman in her late 50s, with gray hair pulled back in a neat bun and a no-nonsense attitude that Benjamin found reassuring. She'd worked as a maternity nurse for 30 years before semi-retiring to take private cases like this one. How was he today? Rebecca asked Tasha as they met in the nursery for the handoff. Good, Tasha replied, handing over the schedule she kept meticulously updated. He had a long nap this afternoon, so he might be more alert tonight. He took 4 ounces at 6, so he should be ready for another bottle around 9 or 10. Rebecca nodded, scanning the notes. Bowel movement? Yes, at 4. Everything looked normal. Good. Rebecca set the schedule on the changing table and reached for Ethan, who was dozing in Tasha's arms. I'll take him. You go get some rest. Tasha had kissed Ethan's forehead and reluctantly handed him over. She always hated this part of the day, the moment when she had to let go. But she reminded herself that she'd see him again in the morning, that this was just temporary. She'd gone to her room and tried to read, but her mind kept wandering. She thought about Zoe as she did every night. She wondered what her daughter would look like now if she'd lived. Would she be smiling yet? Would she have Tasha's nose or her father's eyes? Tasha had never told Benjamin that Zoe's father wasn't in the picture. He'd left when Tasha was 5 months pregnant, saying he wasn't ready to be a father. She'd gone through the pregnancy alone, the birth alone, and the grief alone. At 10:30, Tasha heard Ethan crying through the baby monitor she kept on her nightstand. She listened for a few minutes, expecting Rebecca to soothe him, but the crying continued. After 15 minutes, Tasha got up and padded quietly through the house to the nursery. The door was open but the room was empty. No Rebecca, no Ethan. The crying was coming from downstairs. Tasha followed the sound to the kitchen, where she found Rebecca pacing with Ethan, patting his back in a practiced rhythm. The baby was fussing but not screaming. "Is everything okay?" Tasha asked from the doorway. Rebecca glanced up, slightly startled. "Yes, fine. Just a bit of gas, I think. You should be sleeping." I heard him crying. "Well, I have it under control." Rebecca's tone was dismissive but not unkind. "Go back to bed." Tasha had returned to her room but she kept the monitor on. She heard Rebecca giving Ethan a bottle, heard the baby's satisfied grunts, heard him settle. By 11 there was silence. Then at 11:15, Tasha heard Rebecca's phone ring. The sound was faint through the monitor but clear enough. She heard Rebecca answer. "Mom? What's wrong?" There was a long pause, during which Tasha could only hear one side of the conversation. "What do you mean you fell? Did you call an ambulance?" Another pause. "Okay, stay calm. I'm coming." "Yes, right now. Just sit tight. Don't try to move." Tasha sat up in bed, her heart beginning to race. She heard hurried footsteps, heard doors opening and closing. She got up and opened her own door just in time to see Rebecca rushing down the main staircase, pulling on her coat. "Rebecca?" Tasha called out. Rebecca barely slowed down. "Family emergency. My mother fell. I have to go." "Wait, but what about Ethan? Should I call Mr. Miller?" "He'll be fine. He just ate. He should sleep for a few hours." Rebecca was at the front door now, fumbling with her purse. "I'll call Benjamin myself once I know what's happening with my mother." "But Rebecca, you can't just leave." But she was already gone, the door closing firmly behind her. Tasha stood in the hallway shocked. She understood that emergencies happened, but this was a newborn baby. You didn't just leave without ensuring coverage. She pulled out her phone and called Benjamin's number. It rang 4 times before going to voicemail. "Mr. Miller, this is Tasha. Rebecca just left. Her mother had a fall and she went to help her. I'm here with Ethan. Please call me back when you get this." She checked on Ethan, who was sleeping peacefully in his crib. She stood there for a moment, watching the rise and fall of his tiny chest, before returning to her room. Benjamin would call back soon, she was sure. He'd come home or arrange for someone else to take over. She just needed to stay awake and keep an eye on the baby. By midnight, Benjamin still hadn't called back. Tasha checked her phone 3 times to make sure it was working. She texted him too, but there was no response. She later learned that he'd been at a business dinner in the city with his phone on silent. Important clients he couldn't ignore or interrupt. At 12:30, Ethan woke up crying. Tasha went to him immediately. She picked him up, checked his diaper, which was clean, and carried him downstairs to prepare a bottle. He cried while she heated the formula, his wails echoing through the quiet house. She tested the temperature on her wrist, then offered it to him. Ethan latched on eagerly, sucking hard. But after taking about an ounce, he suddenly pulled away and spit up, the formula coming back up in a rush that soaked both of them. He began crying again, this time with a different quality to his voice. Pain, not just hunger. Tasha cleaned them both up and tried again with a fresh bottle. The same thing happened. Ethan would drink desperately, then vomit it all back up and cry harder. She called Benjamin again. Still no answer. By 1 in the morning, Tasha was walking circles around the house, bouncing Ethan gently, singing every lullaby she knew. The baby was screaming now, his face bright red, his little body rigid with distress. She tried a warm bath, remembering that it had sometimes soothed Zoe. But Ethan only screamed louder in the water. She tried the swing in the nursery, the vibrating bouncer, the white noise machine. Nothing worked. Ethan's cries grew more desperate, more pained. His lips started to look pale and he felt warm to the touch. Tasha took his temperature. 99.2. Not quite a fever but elevated. She called Benjamin's number over and over. Voicemail. 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 At 1:45, Tasha was seriously considering calling an ambulance. Ethan had been crying for 2.5 hours straight. He was clearly in distress, clearly suffering. She was about to dial 911 when she felt the familiar heaviness in her breasts, the letdown reflex triggered by the baby's cries. Her body still produced milk. She'd been pumping and dumping it every day trying to suppress her supply, but it was stubborn. Her doctor had said it could take months to fully dry up, especially with the emotional stress she was under. Tasha looked down at Ethan, at his pale lips and glazed eyes. She thought about Zoe, about how nursing had been the one thing that always calmed her daughter. She thought about how Ethan was clearly allergic or sensitive to the formula, how his little body was rejecting it. She sat down in the rocking chair and lifted her shirt with shaking hands. She was terrified of crossing a line, terrified of what Benjamin would say. But she was more terrified of what would happen to Ethan if she did nothing. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the baby. "I'm so sorry. But I can't let you suffer like this." Ethan latched on immediately and the change was instant. His rigid body relaxed. His crying stopped. He nursed hungrily and Tasha felt tears streaming down her face as she watched him. The relief in his little face was undeniable. He needed this. His body needed this. For an hour Tasha sat there nursing him. She felt like she was betraying Benjamin's trust, but she also felt like she was saving Ethan's life. When the baby finally fell into a deep, satisfied sleep, she held him for a while longer, just watching him breathe. Then she heard footsteps on the stairs and her heart stopped. She looked up to see Benjamin standing in the doorway, his face a mask of shock and anger. And Tasha knew in that instant that everything was about to fall apart. The taxi ride to her apartment felt like a funeral procession. Tasha watched the expensive neighborhoods give way to more modest ones, the houses getting smaller and closer together, until finally they reached her block in Brooklyn. The sun was just starting to rise, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, but Tasha couldn't find any beauty in it. She paid the driver, dragged her suitcase up the 3 flights of stairs, and let herself into her apartment. The silence hit her like a physical force. No baby sounds. No purpose. Just emptiness. Tasha dropped her suitcase by the door and walked to her bedroom. She stood there looking at Zoe's empty crib, and felt something break inside her chest. She'd lost her daughter 6 weeks ago. Now she'd lost Ethan too. Different circumstances but the same hollow ache, the same sense of failure. She lay down on her bed without bothering to change clothes and stared at the ceiling. Her breasts ached, heavy with milk. Her heart ached with a different kind of pain. She'd done what she thought was right, what she believed had saved Ethan's life, but Benjamin had looked at her with such disgust, such anger. He'd made her feel dirty for trying to help. Sleep wouldn't come. Tasha's mind replayed the scene over and over. She should have called 911 instead. She should have found another solution. But what solution? The formula had made Ethan violently ill. He'd been in genuine distress. She tried everything else first. Around 8 in the morning her phone rang. For a moment, hope flared in her chest, the irrational thought that maybe Benjamin was calling to apologize, to ask her to come back. But the caller ID showed her mother's number. "Tasha? Baby, are you okay? You usually call me on Sunday mornings." Tasha's voice cracked. "Mama, I got fired." What? What happened?" Through tears, Tasha told her mother everything. The disappearing nurse. The screaming baby. The formula that made him sick. The desperate decision to nurse him herself. Benjamin's fury. The cold dismissal. Her mother was quiet for a long moment after Tasha finished. "Baby, I understand why you did what you did. But you had to know how it would look." "I didn't care how it looked. I cared about keeping that baby alive." "I know. And that shows your good heart. But Benjamin Miller is a wealthy white man who just lost his wife. He's grieving and scared and trying to do everything right. Walking in on his nanny nursing his child probably hit every fear he has about losing control, about something else going wrong. So I'm supposed to just accept that? I saved his son." "Maybe you did," her mother said gently. "But he doesn't see it that way yet. He sees someone who violated his trust and crossed a major boundary. Right or wrong, that's his perspective. Give him time, Tasha. If that baby really needed you, Benjamin will figure it out." Tasha wanted to believe her mother, but the cold anger in Benjamin's voice still echoed in her ears. "What am I supposed to do now? I have maybe 2 months of rent saved. No job. No references because I can't exactly ask Benjamin for one. Come stay with me for a while. Just until you get back on your feet." "No, Mama. You don't have room and I'm not going to be a burden." "You're never a burden to me." But Tasha couldn't. She needed to figure this out on her own even if she had no idea how. Meanwhile, in Westchester County, Benjamin was having his own crisis. Ethan had finally fallen asleep around 6 in the morning after screaming for 4 straight hours. Benjamin had tried 6 different bottles. He tried holding him, walking with him, singing to him. Nothing worked. The baby was exhausted, his voice hoarse, his little body limp with fatigue. When he finally slept, it was the sleep of complete depletion. Benjamin sat in the nursery watching his son sleep, feeling like the worst father in the world. He'd fired Tasha in anger, in shock, in some primal protective instinct that he didn't fully understand. But now in the quiet morning light, doubt crept in. Had he overreacted? Had Tasha really been trying to help? The rational part of his brain knew the answers, but the emotional part couldn't get past the image he'd walked in on. It felt like a violation even if it hadn't been intended that way. At 9, his mother Virginia arrived, letting herself in with her key. She found Benjamin in the kitchen, drinking his 4th cup of coffee, looking like he hadn't slept in days. "Benjamin, what on earth is going on? I got your message that you needed help with Ethan." Benjamin explained the situation, watching his mother's face shift from concern to horror to righteous anger. "She did what?" Virginia's voice was sharp. "You fired her, I hope." "Of course I did." "Good. That's completely inappropriate. Unacceptable. My God, what was she thinking?" Benjamin rubbed his face. "She said Ethan was sick. That he'd been screaming for hours and couldn't keep the formula down. Then she should have called a doctor. Or called you. She had no right to take matters into her own hands like that." Virginia poured herself coffee, her movements sharp with agitation. "Your father would have called the police." "I don't think we need to involve the police." "I'm not so sure. This could be some kind of conspiracy. Maybe she was trying to make Ethan dependent on her so you couldn't fire her." Benjamin shook his head. "That seems extreme, Mom." "Well, what do you really know about this woman? She comes from some working-class neighborhood in Brooklyn. She lost a baby recently. She could be unstable. She could have been trying to replace her own child with yours." The words hit Benjamin hard. Was that possible? Had Tasha been acting out of some misplaced grief rather than genuine concern for Ethan? Over the next few days, Benjamin hired 3 different nannies in quick succession. The first one lasted 2 days before Ethan's constant crying drove her away. The second one made it 4 days. The third one, a stern woman named Gladys, lasted a week before informing Benjamin that she believed the baby needed medical attention because something was clearly wrong with him. Benjamin took Ethan to 3 different pediatricians. They all said the same thing: the baby was physically healthy. His heart was strong. His lungs were clear. He was gaining weight appropriately. But he cried almost constantly unless he was completely exhausted. He would drink formula but often vomited it back up. He seemed miserable. "Some babies are just fussier than others," one doctor told Benjamin. "He could have colic or reflux. Try keeping him upright after feedings. Try different formulas. Try gas drops. Try a probiotic. It should improve in a few months." But it wasn't improving. If anything, Ethan was getting worse. He developed dark circles under his eyes from exhaustion. His crying became weaker, more listless. He started refusing bottles altogether, turning his face away, his little mouth clamped shut. Benjamin's company needed him. There were deals to close, meetings to attend, decisions to make. But he could barely focus. He lay awake at night listening to Ethan cry, feeling helpless and scared. The staff he'd hired rotated through his house, none of them staying long, all of them looking at him with pity or judgment. His mother called daily, offering advice that never seemed to help. His late wife's family called less often, but when they did, there was an undercurrent of blame in their questions. "Are you sure you're doing everything right?" his mother-in-law asked. "Maybe Ethan needs a woman's touch. A real mother figure." The words stung because they were true. Benjamin was trying his best, but he was failing. He knew it. Everyone knew it. 2 weeks after firing Tasha, Benjamin sat in his study late at night, holding a whiskey he wasn't drinking. Ethan had finally cried himself to sleep around 10. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Benjamin pulled out his phone and, for the first time since that night, he looked at his text messages from Tasha. There were 3 texts from that night, sent before she'd left his house. "Mr. Miller, please call me. I need to explain what happened. I know you're angry, but Ethan needed help. I couldn't let him suffer. I'm sorry. I never meant to hurt you or betray your trust. I only wanted to save him." Benjamin stared at the messages for a long time. Then he did something he'd been avoiding. He called Rebecca, the overnight nurse who'd disappeared that night. She answered on the 3rd ring. "Mr. Miller. I've been expecting your call. You left my son alone." "I know. I'm deeply sorry. My mother had fallen and broken her hip. I panicked. I should have called you first, but I just reacted. I called the next morning to explain and apologize, but you didn't answer. Why didn't you try harder to reach me?" "I did try. I called 5 times. I left voicemails. When you never called back, I assumed you'd replaced me and didn't want to speak with me." Benjamin felt a weight in his stomach. He'd been so angry at Tasha that he'd ignored Rebecca's calls, assuming they were just excuses. He'd never even checked his voicemail. "How is your mother?" he asked quietly. "She's recovering, thank you. I'm back in town now if you need me to return to work." Benjamin thought about it. Rebecca was professional and experienced. But she'd also left without permission, put his son in a dangerous situation. "I'll think about it and let you know." After he hung up, Benjamin sat in silence. He thought about that night from a different angle. Tasha had been left alone with a screaming baby. She'd tried everything. She'd attempted to reach him multiple times. And when nothing else worked, when Ethan was in genuine distress, she'd made a desperate choice. Had it been wrong? Yes. Had it been inappropriate? Absolutely. But had it been malicious? Had it been an attempt to manipulate or harm? For the first time, Benjamin allowed himself to consider that maybe, just maybe, he'd made a mistake. Sometimes our pride keeps us from seeing the truth. Are you still with us? If this story is making you feel something, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Tell us if you think Benjamin was right to fire Tasha, or if he should have listened to her side of the story. 3 weeks after firing Tasha, Benjamin sat in his pediatrician's office for the 5th time, holding Ethan, who had grown alarmingly thin. The baby's clothes hung loose on his tiny frame. His eyes, once bright and alert, had taken on a dull, listless quality. He barely cried anymore, just made soft whimpering sounds that somehow hurt worse than the screaming had. Dr. Patterson, a kind woman in her 50s who had delivered hundreds of babies over her career, examined Ethan thoroughly. She listened to his heart, checked his reflexes, felt his belly. Then she sat back and looked at Benjamin with concern. "His vitals are stable, but he's lost 8 ounces in 3 weeks. That's significant for a baby his size. You said he's refusing to eat?" He turns his head away from the bottle. "Sometimes I can get him to take an ounce or 2, but most of it comes back up." "And you've tried different formulas?" 6 different kinds. Sensitive formula, soy formula, hypoallergenic formula. Nothing makes a difference. Dr. Patterson frowned. "Has anything traumatic happened recently? Any major changes in his routine?" Benjamin hesitated. He hadn't told any of the doctors about Tasha, about what had happened that night. It felt too personal, too complicated. "I had to let his primary caregiver go. He's had several different nannies since then. That could be part of it. Babies are more sensitive to emotional disruption than people realize. They bond with their primary caregivers, and losing that bond can be devastating." She paused. "Would it be possible to bring back the original caregiver, at least temporarily?" "No," Benjamin said firmly. "That's not an option." Dr. Patterson studied him for a moment, then nodded. "All right. I'd like to admit Ethan to the hospital for observation. We'll get fluids into him, run some tests, and monitor him closely. If he continues to refuse food, we may need to discuss a feeding tube." The words hit Benjamin like a punch to the gut. A feeding tube. His son was literally starving himself. Ethan spent 3 days in the hospital. Benjamin barely left his side. The nurses got N4 into his tiny arm, giving him hydration and nutrients. They tried different feeding methods. They brought in a lactation consultant who specialized in feeding issues. They ran blood tests, checked for allergies, looked for any medical explanation. Everything came back normal. "Failure to thrive," one doctor said. "Sometimes babies just stop eating for psychological reasons. The good news is that physically there's nothing wrong. The bad news is that means we can't fix it with medicine." On the 3rd day, Ethan's 4 came out. The nurses tried again to get him to take a bottle. He turned his face away, his little mouth clamped shut. Benjamin held him, tears running down his face, feeling more helpless than he'd ever felt in his life. "Please, buddy," he whispered. "Please eat. I can't lose you too." But Ethan just stared at nothing, his eyes glazed and distant. They were discharged with instructions to follow up in 2 days and a warning that if Ethan didn't start eating, they'd have to readmit him for tube feeding. Benjamin drove home in silence, Ethan's car seat in the back. He kept glancing in the rearview mirror at his son, this tiny person who was slipping away from him, and he didn't know how to stop it. That evening, his sister Julia showed up unannounced. She lived in Boston, but she'd driven down as soon as she heard about the hospitalization. Julia was 3 years younger than Benjamin, a social worker who specialized in child welfare. She'd always been the emotional one, the one who could read people and situations with uncanny accuracy. She took one look at Benjamin and pulled him into a hug. "You look terrible." "Thanks." "Where's Ethan?" "Sleeping upstairs." Finally, Julia made them both tea, then sat across from Benjamin at the kitchen table. "Tell me everything. And I mean everything." Not the sanitized version you gave Mom. So Benjamin did. He told her about losing his wife during childbirth, about the overwhelming grief and responsibility of becoming a single father. He told her about hiring Tasha, about how good she'd been with Ethan, how the baby had thrived under her care. He told her about the night Rebecca disappeared, about walking in on Tasha nursing his son, about firing her in anger. Julia listened without interrupting. When Benjamin finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "You fired her for saving his life," she finally said. She crossed a major line. "She saved his life," Julia repeated. "Benjamin, I work with kids every day. I've seen neglect, I've seen abuse, I've seen situations that would break your heart. What you described, that wasn't any of those things. That was a woman making an impossible choice in an emergency situation. She should have called 911. And said what? That a baby was crying? They would have told her to try comforting him and call back if it got worse. By the time an ambulance arrived, who knows what state he'd be in." Benjamin shook his head. "You didn't see it, Julia. You didn't see how it looked. I don't care how it looked. I care what it was." And what it was, Benjamin, was an act of desperation and love. Julia leaned forward. "Let me ask you something. Before that night, did Tasha ever give you any reason to distrust her?" "No." "Did she take good care of Ethan?" "Yes." "He adored her. And how is he doing now with all these different nannies?" Benjamin's throat tightened. "He's dying. Slowly. The doctors can't figure out why." "I think I can," Julia said quietly. "He's grieving. He lost his mother at birth. Then he bonded with Tasha and suddenly she was gone too. Babies aren't stupid, Benjamin. They know when they've lost someone important. And Ethan is refusing to eat because he's given up. That's ridiculous. He's 3 months old. Age doesn't matter. Loss is loss." Julia reached across the table and took her brother's hand. "You need to find Tasha and bring her back." "I can't. What would people say?" "Who cares what people say? Your son is dying. Nothing else matters." Benjamin pulled his hand away. "You make it sound simple. It's not. Actually, it is that simple. Your pride or your son's life. Choose." Julia stayed that night, helping with Ethan, giving Benjamin a chance to sleep. But Benjamin lay awake in his bed, staring at the ceiling, his sister's words echoing in his mind. The next morning he called Virginia. She arrived within an hour, her face set with determination. "Julia told me about her suggestion," Virginia said without preamble. "It's out of the question. You cannot bring that woman back into this house." "Why not?" "Because it sets a terrible precedent. Because it tells her that she can violate boundaries without consequences. Because it looks like you're condoning what she did." Virginia set her purse down firmly. "I've been asking around. There are excellent nanny agencies that specialize in difficult babies. I'll get you references. More nannies aren't going to help. Ethan doesn't want strangers." "Then what are you suggesting? That you just give in and let this woman win?" "This isn't about winning, Mom. It's about keeping my son alive." Virginia's expression softened slightly. "I understand you're desperate. But bringing her back would be a mistake. Trust me." But Benjamin didn't trust her. Not on this. He thought about the way Ethan had looked in the hospital, hooked up to N4, his little body wasting away. He thought about the doctor saying failure to thrive, like it was just a diagnosis and not a death sentence. After Virginia left, Benjamin went upstairs to the nursery. Ethan was awake in his crib, staring at the mobile above him without real interest. Benjamin picked him up and the baby felt so light, so fragile. "I'm sorry," Benjamin whispered. "I'm so sorry I didn't listen. I'm sorry I let my pride matter more than your needs." Ethan didn't respond, just rested his head against Benjamin's shoulder with exhaustion that should never exist in someone so young. That afternoon, Benjamin made a decision. He went to his study and pulled up his text message history with Tasha. Her number was still there. He stared at it for a long moment, his thumb hovering over the call button. Then he thought about Julia's words. "Your pride or your son's life. Choose." He pressed call. The phone rang 4 times before going to voicemail. Benjamin listened to Tasha's recorded voice, professional and warm, asking him to leave a message. He hung up without speaking. He tried again an hour later. Voicemail again. By evening, Benjamin had called 6 times. No answer. He considered that maybe she'd blocked his number and he couldn't blame her if she had. He'd fired her in the middle of the night, hadn't paid her for her last week of work, hadn't given her any kind of reference or severance. He treated her terribly and now he needed her help. He texted instead, "Tasha, this is Benjamin Miller. I need to speak with you." It's about Ethan. Please call me. No response. Julia, still at the house, watched him pace the kitchen. She might not want to talk to you. You were pretty harsh. I know. So what's your plan? Benjamin stopped pacing. I don't know. I don't even know where she lives exactly. Brooklyn somewhere. Did you do a background check when you hired her? Of course. It's in my files. 20 minutes later, Benjamin had Tasha's address. He stared at it, wondering if showing up at her apartment was crossing a line. But then he thought about Ethan, upstairs with yet another temporary nurse, barely hanging on to life, and he knew he didn't have a choice. I'm going to see her, he told Julia. Want me to come with you? Benjamin shook his head. This is something I need to do alone. The drive to Brooklyn took 40 minutes. Benjamin's driver, Gerald, navigated the increasingly crowded streets with practiced ease, pulling up outside a modest brick apartment building in a working-class neighborhood. Benjamin had spent his whole life in wealthy suburbs, in gated communities and private schools. This world felt foreign to him. He climbed the 3 flights of stairs, his heart pounding. He'd rehearsed what he wanted to say, but now, standing in front of apartment 3C, all his prepared words fled his mind. He knocked. No answer. He knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. Benjamin stood there for a moment, wondering what to do. He could leave a note. He could wait. He could. The door next to Tasha's opened, and an elderly woman peered out. You looking for Tasha? Yes. Do you know where she is? Hospital, I think. She hasn't been looking too good lately. Saw her leaving this morning with her mama. She could barely walk. Benjamin's stomach dropped. Which hospital? Don't know. But her mama's name is Patricia. Patricia Bryant. Works at Methodist Hospital, I think. Or maybe it was Maimonides. Benjamin thanked her and headed back downstairs, his mind racing. He called Julia while Gerald drove. Tasha's sick. A neighbor said she went to the hospital. Which one? I don't know. I'm checking Methodist first. At Methodist Hospital, Benjamin rushed to the emergency room desk. I'm looking for Tasha Bryant. She was brought in today. The nurse checked her computer. I'm sorry, sir. We don't have anyone by that name. He tried Maimonides next, then Brooklyn Hospital Center, then New York Presbyterian. Nothing. Either Tasha wasn't at any of these hospitals, or they weren't telling him because he wasn't family. Benjamin sat in his car outside the last hospital, feeling defeated. Then his phone rang. Unknown number. Hello? Mr. Miller? This is Patricia Bryant, Tasha's mother. She said you called and texted her several times today. Yes. I need to speak with her. It's urgent. I know why you're calling. Tasha told me about Ethan, about what happened. But I need you to understand something before I tell you where she is. My daughter is barely holding herself together. When you fired her, it broke something in her. She's been struggling to eat, to sleep, to function. This morning she collapsed at her apartment. I'm with her now at urgent care, getting her 4 fluids for dehydration. Benjamin closed his eyes, guilt washing over him. I'm sorry. I didn't know. Of course you didn't know. You threw her out at 2 in the morning without any concern for what happened to her after. You're right. I was wrong. But please, I need to see her. Ethan needs her. Patricia was quiet for a moment. What's wrong with the baby? Benjamin explained everything. The refusal to eat, the weight loss, the hospital stay, the diagnosis of failure to thrive. His voice cracked as he talked, all his careful control crumbling. He's dying, Benjamin finished. The doctors say there's nothing medically wrong, but he's giving up. And I think it's because he lost Tasha. I think he's grieving, and I don't know how to help him except to bring her back. But I know I don't deserve her help after how I treated her. I'm just asking for a chance to apologize and to beg her to save my son one more time. Patricia was silent for so long that Benjamin thought she'd hung up. Then she sighed. We're at CityMed Urgent Care on Flatbush Avenue. But Mr. Miller, if you hurt my daughter again, if you make promises you don't keep or treat her like she's disposable, I will make sure you regret it. Do you understand? Yes, ma'am. Good. We'll be here for another hour at least. Benjamin had Gerald drive straight there. The urgent care clinic was in a strip mall, nothing like the pristine private practices Benjamin was used to. He walked in and approached the desk. I'm here to see Tasha Bryant. The receptionist checked her list. Are you family? No, but her mother called me. She's expecting me. The receptionist looked skeptical but paged someone. A minute later, a woman who looked like an older version of Tasha came through the door. She had the same warm brown eyes, the same heart-shaped face, but her expression was anything but warm as she looked at Benjamin. Mr. Miller. Mrs. Bryant. It's Miss Bryant. Follow me. She led him through the clinic to a small examination room. Tasha sat on the paper-covered table and four in her arm, wearing sweatpants and an oversized green sweater. She looked thin, exhausted, and when she saw Benjamin, her eyes widened with shock and then hardened with something that looked like anger or pain or both. What are you doing here? Her voice was hoarse. Benjamin stood in the doorway, suddenly unsure. I came to talk to you. To apologize. To ask for your help. I'll give you 10 minutes, Patricia said. And I'll be right outside. She left, closing the door behind her. Benjamin and Tasha stared at each other. You look terrible, Tasha said finally. So do you. A ghost of a smile crossed her face. Fair. Benjamin moved further into the room but kept his distance, sensing she needed space. Tasha, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for how I reacted that night, for firing you without listening, for everything. You tried to explain and I wouldn't hear it. I was angry and scared and I let that control me. I was wrong. Tasha looked down at her hands. Why are you here now? Because Ethan is dying and I think it's my fault. I took away the one person he bonded with, the one person who made him feel safe, and now he's given up. He won't eat. He barely moves. The doctors say there's nothing physically wrong, but he's fading away. Tears slipped down Tasha's cheeks. How much weight has he lost? 8 ounces in 3 weeks. They wanted to admit him for tube feeding. Oh God. Tasha covered her face with her hands. That poor baby. I know I have no right to ask this. I know I don't deserve your help. But Tasha, I'm begging you. Please come back. Please help him. I'll pay you whatever you want. I'll give you anything. Just please don't let him die because of my mistake. Tasha was crying now, her shoulders shaking. You made me feel like a criminal. Like I'd done something horrible instead of saving his life. I know. And I'll spend the rest of my life regretting that if I have to. But right now all I care about is Ethan. He needs you. I need you. Tasha looked up at him, her eyes red and swollen. I can't go through that again. I can't bond with him and then lose him. It would kill me. You won't lose him. I promise. Whatever it takes to make this right, I'll do it. You'll have complete job security. A contract. Legal protection. Anything. It's not about the money or the contract. Tasha wiped her eyes. It's about trust. How do I know you won't just fire me again the next time I make a decision you don't like? Benjamin moved closer, crouching down so he was at her eye level. Because I've learned something in the past 3 weeks. I've learned that my son's life matters more than my pride. More than what people think. More than maintaining perfect control. I've learned that you loved him enough to risk everything, and that makes you exactly the person he needs. I'm asking you to trust me one more time. And if I ever give you reason to regret it, you can walk away and I won't try to stop you. Tasha stared at him for a long moment. I need to think about it. Of course. Take whatever time you need. How long does Ethan have? The question hit Benjamin hard. The doctor said if he doesn't start eating in the next few days, they'll have to tube feed him. But I don't think that will help if he's given up emotionally. Tasha closed her eyes. Can I see him? Before I decide. Yes, absolutely. Whenever you want. Tomorrow. After they release me from here. She looked at the 4 in her arm. I need to get my own strength back first. Benjamin nodded and stood. Thank you. For even considering this. As he turned to leave, Tasha called out, Mr. Miller? He looked back. I didn't do it to manipulate you or to make Ethan dependent on me. I did it because he was suffering and I couldn't stand to watch him suffer. That's the only reason. I know, Benjamin said quietly. And I'm sorry I ever thought otherwise. Tasha arrived at the Miller estate the next afternoon, driven by her mother, who insisted on coming along. Patricia wanted to make sure her daughter wasn't walking into another situation that would break her heart. Benjamin met them at the door looking nervous. Thank you for coming. Both of you. He led them through the house to the nursery. As they climbed the stairs, Tasha could hear the soft, weak cries of a baby. Her heart clenched. She remembered those cries, remembered Ethan's lusty, healthy wails from before. This was different. This was the sound of a child who'd stopped fighting. At the nursery door, she paused, bracing herself. Benjamin opened it and Tasha stepped inside. The current nanny, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, was sitting in the rocking chair, holding Ethan and trying to get him to take a bottle. The baby's head turned away, his eyes closed, his little body limp. Oh, Ethan, Tasha whispered. The nanny looked up, startled. Benjamin made introductions quickly. Sandra, this is Tasha. She used to be Ethan's primary caregiver. Tasha, this is Sandra. Sandra stood still holding Ethan. He won't take the bottle. I've been trying for 30 minutes. Tasha moved closer, and the moment she did, something remarkable happened. Ethan's eyes opened. His head turned toward her. And he made a sound, a small, hopeful cry that was so different from his weak whimpers that everyone in the room stopped breathing. Can I hold him? Tasha asked, her voice shaking. Sandra transferred the baby to Tasha's arms, and Ethan immediately pressed his face against her chest. His little hands clutched at her blue shirt. He began to cry, but these weren't cries of pain or hunger. These were cries of recognition, of relief. I'm here, Tasha murmured, tears streaming down her face. I'm here, baby. It's okay. I'm here. She sat down in the rocking chair, cradling Ethan close. He burrowed against her, and she could feel how thin he'd become, how fragile. Her heart broke all over again. Can I try nursing him? She asked Benjamin. Just to see if he'll eat. Benjamin nodded, unable to speak. Sandra quietly left the room, giving them privacy. Patricia stood by the window, watching with her arms crossed. Tasha adjusted her shirt and positioned Ethan. He latched on immediately, nursing with a desperate hunger that was both heartbreaking and hopeful. She felt her milk let down, her body remembering this purpose it had been trying to forget. They sat like that for 20 minutes. Ethan nursed and then fell asleep in her arms, his breathing deep and even for the first time in weeks. Tasha looked down at him, at his peaceful face, and she knew she couldn't say no. She couldn't walk away from this baby who needed her so badly. I'll come back, she said quietly, looking at Benjamin. But I have conditions. Anything. I want a contract. In writing. With specific terms about my role and my authority to make decisions about Ethan's care. I want you to promise that you'll listen to me, that you'll respect my judgment about what he needs. Done. I want health insurance. Full benefits. And I want my own space that isn't just a room off the kitchen. Somewhere that feels like home. There's a guest cottage on the property. 3 bedrooms, full kitchen, private entrance. It's yours. Tasha looked at her mother, who gave a slight nod of approval. Okay. But Mr. Miller, if you ever make me feel ashamed or wrong for caring about your son, if you ever dismiss me or disrespect me the way you did before, I'll leave. And I won't come back. Do you understand? I understand. And Tasha, please call me Benjamin. We're going to be partners in raising Ethan. Let's at least be on a first-name basis. Something shifted in the room at that moment. A tentative peace, fragile but real. Over the next few days, Benjamin's lawyer drew up a comprehensive contract. Tasha would be Ethan's primary caregiver with full authority to make day-to-day decisions about his care. She would receive a generous salary, health insurance, retirement contributions, and paid time off. The contract included a severance clause that would give her 6 months' salary if she was terminated without cause. Tasha moved into the guest cottage, and her mother helped her settle in. It was beautiful, far nicer than anything Tasha had ever lived in before. Large windows let in natural light. The kitchen had modern appliances. The master bedroom had its own bathroom. For the first time since losing Zoe, Tasha felt like maybe she could build a life again. Benjamin kept his distance those first few days, giving Tasha space to bond with Ethan without interference. He watched from afar as his son transformed. Within 48 hours, Ethan was smiling again. His color improved. He started gaining weight. The listless, defeated baby became a happy, curious child again. Sandra, the temporary nanny, stayed on for a few more days to help with the transition, but it was clear that Ethan only wanted Tasha. He would fuss when Sandra held him and calm immediately when Tasha took him back. You have a gift, Sandra told Tasha on her last day. I've been doing this for 20 years, and I've never seen a bond like yours with this baby. After Sandra left, it was just Tasha, Ethan, and Benjamin working out the rhythms of their new arrangement. Benjamin would leave for work in the morning, and Tasha would care for Ethan during the day. In the evenings, Benjamin would come to the cottage to spend time with his son. At first, these visits were awkward and formal. But gradually they became more comfortable. One evening, about 2 weeks after Tasha returned, Benjamin arrived to find her cooking dinner while Ethan napped in a portable crib in the corner of the kitchen. That smells amazing, he said from the doorway. Tasha looked up, surprised. Usually Benjamin just came in, played with Ethan for an hour, and left. It's just chicken and rice. Nothing special. It smells like home, Benjamin said quietly. My house hasn't smelled like home in a long time. Tasha felt something shift in her chest. Have you eaten? Not yet. I usually just grab something on the way home. There's plenty if you want to stay. Benjamin hesitated, then nodded. I'd like that. They sat at her small kitchen table and for the first time they talked as equals. Not employer and employee but two people who'd both lost someone, who both loved the same little boy, who were both trying to figure out how to move forward. Benjamin told her about his wife, Caroline. How they'd met in college, how they'd planned their whole life together. How her death during childbirth had shattered him. How he'd been so focused on doing everything right that he'd lost sight of what actually mattered. Tasha told him more about Zoe, about the 7 perfect days she'd had with her daughter before her tiny heart had given out. About the guilt she still carried, the sense that she'd somehow failed to protect her baby. About how caring for Ethan had given her a reason to keep breathing when she'd wanted to give up. "I'm sorry I didn't see it before," Benjamin said. "I'm sorry I didn't understand that you were grieving too, that you were trying to save Ethan not just for him but for yourself." "And I'm sorry I scared you," Tasha replied. "I should have tried harder to reach you, to find another solution. But in that moment, with him screaming and turning pale, I just reacted. You saved him. Twice. Once that night and once when you agreed to come back. I'll never forget that." From that evening on, something changed between them. Benjamin started coming to the cottage more often. Sometimes he'd help with Ethan's bath time. Sometimes he'd just sit and watch Tasha and the baby play. Sometimes they'd talk late into the evening after Ethan was asleep, sharing stories and slowly building a friendship. Tasha's mother noticed the change. "You're smiling again," she said one Sunday when she came to visit. "I haven't seen you smile like that since before Zoe." "I'm healing," Tasha said. Finally. Benjamin's family noticed too, but their reactions were less positive. Virginia came to visit and was horrified to find that not only had Benjamin rehired Tasha, but he'd given her the guest cottage and they were eating dinner together. "Benjamin, what are you thinking?" Virginia demanded. "This is completely inappropriate. She's your employee. She's Ethan's mother in every way that matters," Benjamin replied calmly. "Don't be ridiculous. She's his nanny. There's a difference. Is there? She's the one who feeds him, who comforts him when he cries, who knows what every sound means. She's the one he reaches for when he's scared. That sounds like a mother to me." Virginia's face went red. "Your wife is probably rolling in her grave. My wife would want Ethan to be loved and cared for. Tasha does that. So please, Mom, either accept the situation or don't visit." "But I'm not changing anything." Virginia left in a huff, and Benjamin didn't hear from her for 2 weeks. He didn't particularly care. For the first time since Caroline's death, he felt like his life was moving forward instead of just surviving. Spring arrived at the Miller estate with an explosion of color. The gardens bloomed with tulips and daffodils. The trees budded with new leaves. And inside the guest cottage, a different kind of blossoming was taking place. Ethan was thriving. At 5 months old, he was hitting all his milestones. He could roll over, grab toys, and he'd started making babbling sounds that Tasha swore were attempts at words. His laughter filled the cottage, bright and joyful. Tasha had gained back the weight she'd lost. Her eyes had lost that hollow, haunted look. She'd started wearing brighter colors, like the red dress she had on today, instead of the muted grays and blacks she'd hidden in before. She'd even started singing again, something she hadn't done since Zoe died. Benjamin found himself making excuses to spend more time at the cottage. He'd bring coffee in the morning, just to check in. He'd come home early from work to play with Ethan. He'd stay for dinner most nights, helping Tasha clean up afterward while the baby played on his mat. They developed routines. Saturday mornings were for the farmer's market. Benjamin would push Ethan's stroller while Tasha picked out fresh vegetables and flowers. Sunday afternoons were for walks around the property. Weeknight evenings were for reading. Tasha would read to Ethan while Benjamin worked on his laptop nearby, comfortable in the shared silence. One evening in late April, after Ethan was asleep, Benjamin and Tasha sat on her small porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. The property was peaceful, the only sounds the chirping of birds and the distant hum of traffic from the highway. "I've been thinking," Benjamin said, staring at his coffee cup, "about setting up a college fund for Ethan. And about updating my will to make sure he's taken care of if anything happens to me." "That's good," Tasha said. "Every parent should do that. I also want to make sure you're taken care of. You should be his legal guardian if something happens to me." Tasha's head snapped up. "What? I mean it. You're more his mother than anyone else. I want it legally established that you'd have custody if I die." "Benjamin, I'm his nanny. Your family would never allow that." "I don't care what my family allows. This is my decision." He turned to face her. "Tasha, these past 6 weeks have shown me something I should have realized from the beginning. Ethan loves you. He needs you. And I trust you completely with his life and his future. So yes, I want you to be his legal guardian. Tears welled in Tasha's eyes. That's the most meaningful thing anyone has ever said to me. It's just the truth. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then Tasha asked, "Do you think Caroline would approve?" "Of me, I mean. Of this arrangement." Benjamin considered the question seriously. "I think Caroline would be grateful. She was terrified of dying in childbirth. She made me promise that if something happened to her, I'd make sure Ethan was loved. Not just cared for but truly loved. You've given him that. So yes, I think she'd approve. I wish I could have met her. She would have liked you. She valued authenticity, kindness. You would have been friends." The conversation drifted to other topics. Tasha told him about a foundation she'd been researching, one that supported mothers who lost infants. She'd been thinking about volunteering, maybe even eventually starting something local. "I think that's wonderful," Benjamin said. "If you need funding to get started, I'd be happy to help. I don't want your money for personal projects." "Why not? I have more than I need and you're doing something meaningful. Let me help." Tasha smiled. "Maybe eventually. Let me figure out what I'm doing first." As the sky darkened and stars began to appear, Benjamin realized he didn't want to leave. He wanted to stay here in this peaceful cottage, with this woman who'd brought light back into his life. The realization startled him. Over the next few weeks, his feelings became harder to ignore. He found himself watching Tasha when she didn't know he was looking. He noticed the way she laughed, the way she moved, the way she cared for Ethan with such tenderness. He noticed how beautiful she was, not just physically but in her kindness, her strength, her resilience. But he also worried. Was he just grateful? Was he confusing appreciation with something deeper? Was it too soon after Caroline's death to feel this way about someone else? He talked to Julia about it during one of her visits. They were sitting in his office while Tasha took Ethan for a walk around the property. "I think I'm falling for her," he admitted. Julia didn't look surprised. "Of course you are. She's amazing. But is it real? Or am I just grateful that she saved Ethan?" "Benjamin, gratitude doesn't make you smile the way you do when you talk about her. Gratitude doesn't make you rush home from work early. Gratitude doesn't make you look at someone like they're the sun and you're a planet orbiting around them." Benjamin rubbed his face. "It's too soon. Caroline's only been gone 7 months. There's no timeline for grief or for healing. And honestly, I think Caroline would want you to be happy. She loved you too much to want you to be alone forever. What if Tasha doesn't feel the same way? Then you be patient. You continue being her friend and Ethan's father. But Benjamin, I see the way she looks at you too. I think you might be surprised." But Benjamin wasn't ready to risk what they had. The peace, the partnership, the easy friendship. So he kept his feelings to himself and tried to be content with the way things were. In early May, Benjamin's company closed a major deal he'd been working on for months. It was a significant success, one that would secure the company's future and make him considerably wealthier. His colleagues wanted to throw a celebration, but Benjamin felt conflicted. How could he celebrate when Caroline wasn't there to share it? How could he feel happy about success when he'd lost so much? He came home that evening feeling heavy despite the good news. He found Tasha in the cottage garden, planting flowers while Ethan sat nearby in his bouncer, watching butterflies. "You're home early," Tasha said, looking up with a smile that faded when she saw his expression. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. Actually, something's right. My company closed the Riverside deal today." "That's wonderful. That's what you've been working on for months, right?" "Yeah. So why do you look so sad?" Benjamin sat down on the garden bench. "Caroline and I always celebrated big wins together. We'd go to this little Italian restaurant in the city and order too much wine and laugh about nothing. I've been thinking about that all day, about how she's not here to celebrate with me." Tasha set down her trowel and moved to sit beside him. "Tell me about her. Not about how she died, but about who she was." So Benjamin did. He told Tasha about Caroline's terrible sense of direction, how she'd get lost going to places she'd been 100 times. About her competitive streak, how she'd once challenged him to a race in Central Park and beaten him by a full minute. About her awful cooking, how she'd once tried to make him a birthday cake and it had come out tasting like feet. About how she'd cry during sad commercials but never during actual sad movies. About how she'd wanted 3 kids and a dog in a house full of noise and love. Tasha listened, smiling at the funny parts, tearing up at the tender parts. When he finished, she said, "She sounds like she was remarkable." She was. And I think she'd want you to celebrate today. Not in a restaurant, maybe, but to acknowledge that you did something big and important. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to make dinner, nothing fancy, just pasta and salad. We're going to put Ethan to bed. And then we're going to sit on the porch and you're going to tell me all about this deal and why it matters. And we're going to toast with sparkling cider because I can't have wine while nursing, and you're going to let yourself feel proud. Deal? Benjamin felt his throat tighten. Deal. That evening unfolded exactly as Tasha had planned. The pasta was perfect, the conversation easy. After Ethan was asleep, they sat on the porch with their sparkling cider, and Benjamin explained the details of the business deal. Tasha asked thoughtful questions, and Benjamin found himself getting excited about the work again, remembering why he loved what he did. To new beginnings, Tasha said, raising her glass. To new beginnings, Benjamin echoed, clinking his glass against hers. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the air between them felt charged with possibility. Benjamin wondered if he should say something, if he should tell her how he felt. But then Tasha looked away, breaking the moment, and Benjamin let it pass. Not yet, he thought. But soon. Summer arrived with warm sunshine and longer days. Ethan was 6 months old now, sitting up on his own and starting to eat solid foods. Tasha had researched baby nutrition extensively, preparing homemade purees that Ethan devoured with enthusiasm. His pediatrician declared him perfectly healthy, thriving in every way. Benjamin's mother had finally come around, or at least stopped actively disapproving. She visited every few weeks, and while she was never warm toward Tasha, she was civil. That was progress. One Saturday in June, Benjamin suggested a trip to the beach. Ethan's never seen the ocean, he said over breakfast in the cottage. And it's supposed to be beautiful today. Tasha hesitated. I don't know if I have a swimsuit that still fits. We don't have to swim. We can just walk on the sand, let Ethan feel the water. Okay. That sounds nice. They packed up Ethan's things and drove to Jones Beach, arriving mid-morning before the crowds got too thick. Benjamin carried the baby while Tasha hauled the beach bag filled with supplies. They found a spot near the water, spread out a blanket and set up the umbrella for shade. Ethan was fascinated by the sand, grabbing handfuls and letting it run through his tiny fingers. When Tasha carried him down to the water's edge, letting his toes touch the foam, he squealed with delight. He loves it, Benjamin said, laughing at his son's expression of pure joy. Every baby should get to experience this, Tasha said. The ocean is magic. They spent hours there, playing with Ethan, eating sandwiches from a nearby shop, watching families splash in the waves. At one point, an older couple walked by and smiled at them. Beautiful family, the woman said. Neither Benjamin nor Tasha corrected her. They just smiled and said thank you. On the drive home, Ethan fell asleep in his car seat, exhausted from all the excitement. Tasha looked out the window at the passing scenery, feeling content in a way she hadn't felt in years. Thank you for today, she said quietly. Thank you for saying yes. I've been thinking, Tasha said, about that foundation I mentioned. The one for mothers who lose infants. What about it? I want to actually do it. Start small, just local at first. Maybe a support group, some resources for families going through loss. I've been researching how to set it up as a nonprofit. That's wonderful. How can I help? I don't want charity, Benjamin. If I'm going to do this, it needs to be mine. I understand. But if you need legal advice, financial planning, any of that infrastructure stuff, let me know. I have resources that could help. Tasha turned to look at him. Why do you do that? Do what? Offer help without making it feel like you're taking over or being condescending. Most wealthy people I've known have this attitude, like their help comes with strings or judgment. But you never do that. Benjamin was quiet for a moment. My father was like that. Every gift came with expectations. Every favor had conditions. I watched him manipulate people with his money, use it to control them. I swore I'd never be that person. Money is just a tool. It should be used to make life easier, not to make people feel small. You're a good man, Benjamin Miller. I'm trying to be. The following week, Benjamin made a decision that surprised even himself. He offered Tasha a formal position not just as Ethan's caregiver, but as his household manager and family coordinator. The role came with a significant salary increase, equity in his company, and a real voice in family decisions. I don't understand, Tasha said when he presented the offer. I'm already his nanny. What's different? Everything's different. You're not just caring for Ethan. You're running this household. You coordinate with the staff, manage schedules, make sure everything functions. And more than that, your family. This is me acknowledging that officially. Family, Tasha repeated, testing the word. Yes. You and Ethan, you're my family now. I want to make sure you're protected, that you have security not just in a contract but in real terms. Equity in the company means you'll share in its success. You'll have real wealth of your own. Tasha's eyes filled with tears. I don't know what to say. Say yes, please. She did. The new arrangement meant Tasha had authority over household decisions. She hired a part-time housekeeper to help Patricia. She reorganized the kitchen. She even made suggestions about Benjamin's schedule, encouraging him to take more time off, to be present for Ethan's milestones. You're going to miss his childhood if you're always at work, she said one evening when Benjamin mentioned a business trip to Singapore. Can someone else go? Probably. But I've always been the one to close international deals. Is that because you're the only one who can, or because you don't trust anyone else to do it? The question hit home. Benjamin realized she was right. He'd been using work as a shield, a way to avoid really feeling things. I'll send Jordan instead. He's ready. True to his word, Benjamin started delegating more. He came home earlier. He took weekends off. He was present for Ethan's first real laugh, his first time sitting up unassisted, his first taste of mashed bananas. And he was present for Tasha too. He listened when she talked about the foundation she was building. He celebrated when she facilitated her first support group meeting for grieving mothers. He held her hand when she cried on the anniversary of Zoe's death, letting her talk about her daughter without trying to fix her pain. One evening in late July, they were giving Ethan his bath together, a routine they'd fallen into. Tasha washed while Benjamin held the baby steady. Ethan splashed happily, soaking both of them. He's growing so fast, Tasha said. Soon he'll be crawling, then walking, then running away from us. Time moves too quickly, Benjamin agreed. Do you ever think about giving him siblings? The question came out casually, but Tasha's cheeks flushed slightly. Sometimes. I always wanted more kids. But I can't imagine doing it without. He trailed off, realizing what he was about to say. Without what? Without the right partner. Someone who already loves Ethan. Someone I trust completely. Their eyes met over the baby's head. The air felt thick with things unsaid. Benjamin, Tasha started, but then Ethan splashed a huge wave of water that drenched them both, breaking the tension. They laughed, the moment passing, but something had shifted. They both felt it. That night, after Ethan was asleep, Benjamin couldn't stop thinking about that conversation. About what he'd almost said. About what he wanted to say. He knocked on Tasha's cottage door around 9, his heart pounding. She answered in pajama pants and a maroon t-shirt, her hair in a messy bun. Is everything okay? I need to tell you something. Tasha stepped aside, letting him in. They sat on her couch, the same couch where they'd spent countless evenings talking. I'm not good at this, Benjamin started. At talking about feelings. Caroline used to tease me about it. She said I'd rather solve a complex business problem than discuss emotions. You're doing fine, Tasha said gently. I care about you. More than I probably should. More than just as Ethan's caregiver or even as a friend. And I know this is complicated. I know I'm your employer and you're still grieving and maybe this is the worst possible timing. But I can't keep pretending I don't feel this way. Tasha was quiet for a long moment. I care about you too. But I'm scared. Of what? Of losing this. What we have now, this peace and partnership and family feeling. If we try to be something more and it doesn't work, where does that leave Ethan? Where does it leave us? I understand. And I'm not asking you to make any decisions tonight. I just needed you to know how I feel. We can take all the time you need. Or we can stay exactly as we are. Whatever you're comfortable with. Tasha reached out and took his hand. Can I think about it? Of course. He stood to leave, but she didn't let go of his hand. Benjamin? Yeah. Thank you. For being patient with me. For understanding that I need time. You're worth waiting for. 3 months later, on a crisp October morning, everything changed. Tasha had been thinking about Benjamin's confession for weeks, turning it over in her mind, examining it from every angle. She'd talked to her mother, who'd given her blessing. She'd talked to her therapist, who'd encouraged her to be open to happiness. She'd even, in a quiet moment, talked to Zoe's memory, asking for permission to love again. But the real turning point came one evening when she was putting Ethan to bed. The baby was 9 months old now, babbling constantly, pulling himself up on furniture. He was becoming a little person with opinions and preferences and a bright, curious mind. As she rocked him, singing softly, Ethan looked up at her and said, clear as day, Mama. Tasha froze. What did you say? Mama. He reached up and patted her face, smiling. Tears streamed down Tasha's cheeks. That's right, baby. Mama's here. Benjamin appeared in the doorway just then, having heard from the monitor. Did he just? He called me Mama, Tasha whispered, her voice shaking. Benjamin moved closer, kneeling beside the rocking chair. Ethan reached for him with his other hand. Dada. They both laughed through their tears. Ethan looked between them, pleased with himself, clearly aware he'd done something wonderful. After Ethan was finally asleep, Tasha and Benjamin stood in the nursery, neither wanting to break the spell of the moment. He knows, Tasha said. He knows we're his family. We are his family. The three of us. Tasha turned to face Benjamin. I've been thinking about what you said. About caring for me. And? I'm scared. But I'm more scared of never trying, of always wondering what might have been. Hope bloomed in Benjamin's eyes. What are you saying? I'm saying yes. To giving this a chance. To seeing if what we have could become something more. Benjamin's smile was radiant. He reached out slowly, giving her time to change her mind, and cupped her face gently. Can I kiss you? Yes. Their first kiss was soft, tentative, full of promise. When they pulled apart, both were crying. Too fast? Benjamin asked. Perfect, Tasha replied. They took it slow after that. Benjamin courted her properly, with flowers and date nights and thoughtful gestures. Tasha let herself be courted, let herself believe that maybe she deserved this happiness. They kept things quiet at first, not wanting to deal with outside opinions before they'd figured things out themselves. But eventually they had to tell people. Julia was thrilled. Finally. I've been waiting for you two to figure this out. Virginia was less enthusiastic but surprisingly not hostile. If you're happy, Benjamin, then I suppose that's what matters. And she is good with Ethan. Tasha's mother cried happy tears and hugged Benjamin like he was already family. You take care of my girl. I will. I promise. By spring, 9 months after Tasha had returned to the Miller estate, they were inseparable. Benjamin had moved most of his things to the cottage, preferring its cozy warmth to his big empty house. They were building a life together, blending their grief and hope into something beautiful. One evening in April, with Ethan playing on the floor between them, Benjamin got down on one knee. Tasha's hands flew to her mouth. What are you doing? I'm asking you to marry me. To be my partner, my love, and Ethan's mother in every official way. I know it's fast. I know people will have opinions. But I don't care. I love you, Tasha Bryant. I love your strength, your kindness, your enormous heart. I love the way you love my son. I love who I am when I'm with you. So will you marry me? The ring was simple but beautiful, a sapphire surrounded by small diamonds. Tasha looked at it, then at Benjamin, then at Ethan, who was watching them with curious eyes. Yes, she said. Yes, absolutely yes. Benjamin slipped the ring on her finger and kissed her, while Ethan clapped his hands and laughed, not understanding but sensing the joy. They planned a small wedding for June, just close family and friends. Tasha wore a simple white dress with green accents. Benjamin wore a navy suit. Ethan, 14 months old and recently walking, toddled down the aisle in a tiny red vest, carrying the rings in a small basket. Patricia cried through the whole ceremony. Julia served as Tasha's maid of honor. Even Virginia managed to smile, seeing how happy her son looked. When they exchanged vows, they included promises to Ethan too, pledging to raise him with love and honesty, to show him what real family means. Family isn't always about blood, Benjamin said in his vows, looking at Tasha and then at his son. It's about love and commitment and choosing each other every day. Tasha chose to save Ethan when he needed her most. She chose to come back when she had every reason to stay away. She chose to love us when we didn't deserve it. And now I'm choosing her forever. Tasha's vows were equally moving. I lost my daughter and I thought I'd never survive that pain. But then I found Ethan and through him I found purpose again. I found hope. And I found love with Benjamin, a man who shows me every day what kindness looks like. I'm honored to be Ethan's mother. I'm honored to be your wife. And I promise to love both of you with everything I have for the rest of my life. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. After the ceremony, they had a small reception in the garden of the estate. As the sun set, casting golden light over everything, Benjamin found Tasha standing by herself, watching Ethan play with Julia. Happy? He asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. Beyond happy. I never thought I'd feel this way again. Like everything makes sense. Thank you for giving me another chance. For giving us a chance. Tasha turned in his arms to face him. Thank you for seeing me. For trusting me with your son. For loving me despite everything. Because of everything, Benjamin corrected. Your strength, your survival, your ability to love even after loss. That's what I fell in love with. They danced as the stars came out, Ethan sleeping in Patricia's arms nearby, perfectly content. And for the first time since losing their first loves, both Benjamin and Tasha felt whole again. 2 years later they welcomed a daughter, Rose. Ethan was thrilled to be a big brother. He'd run to Tasha whenever the baby cried, patting her head gently and saying, "It's okay, Rose. Mama's here." Tasha's foundation had grown into a successful nonprofit, helping hundreds of families navigate the pain of infant loss. She ran it with passion and dedication, turning her own grief into a source of healing for others. Benjamin had stepped back from the day-to-day operations of his company, preferring to spend his time with his family. He discovered that success meant nothing if you had no one to share it with. They moved into the cottage permanently, turning Benjamin's big house into offices for Tasha's foundation. The cottage felt like home in a way the mansion never had, full of noise and laughter and love. On quiet evenings, Benjamin and Tasha would sit on their porch, watching their children play in the garden, and they'd remember. They'd remember their lost loves, Caroline and Zoe. They'd remember the grief that had nearly destroyed them both. They'd remember the moment that had brought them together, that terrifying night when Tasha had made an impossible choice. "Do you ever think about how close we came to never having this?" Tasha asked one such evening. "All the time. If you hadn't been brave enough to help Ethan that night. If I hadn't been desperate enough to swallow my pride and find you. If either of us had given up. But we didn't give up." "No," Benjamin agreed, pulling her close. "We didn't. And look at what we built instead." They built a family. Not through blood or tradition but through choice and love and forgiveness. They built a life from the broken pieces of their pain, creating something beautiful and whole and real. And as the sun set over their little cottage, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Benjamin and Tasha held hands and watched their children play, grateful for second chances, for love that heals, and for the courage to say yes when life offers unexpected grace.